For a time, the slasher dominated cinemas, with studios and independent creators churning out visceral tales that turned a quick buck. But even after the slasher had waned, it remained a major part of horror on film. And with so many movies made in the subgenre, it's easy for great entries to go overlooked, especially when they're not part of the most recognizable franchises. Michael, Jason, Freddy, Chucky, and more have become the face of the slasher. But not every great slasher villain returns, and not every great slasher movie has an iconic killer. In fact, the slasher is much more flexible than most think. It's just that many get lost in the shuffle. Maybe you're a fan, and you've seen all of these movies, but it's time for a rewatch. Maybe you're less acquainted with the genre and don't know much beyond the classics. In any case, it's fun to discuss the films that don't get continually featured by every list and video when Halloween comes around. So here, I'd like to highlight 13 unsung slasher movies that any fan of the genre should watch. These films aren't ranked, but we'll be going chronologically by release date for this trip through the lesser-seen side of horror history. From the classically constructed to the meta deconstructions, these are slashers that don't get enough love. Number 1. Tourist Trap from 1979. Written by David Schmoller and J. Larry Carroll and directed by David Schmoller. A group of road-tripping friends' cars break down, stranding them at a tourist trap in the middle of nowhere, only for a mysterious telekinetic killer to start picking them off one by one. Tourist Trap comes really early in the life cycle of the slasher, with the film only coming out a year after Halloween, and taking more inspiration from Texas Chainsaw Massacre, with its story of death in the middle of nowhere, a series of victims walking headlong into danger, and a killer who's basically a telekinetic Leatherface. Writers Schmoller and Carroll even wanted to hire John Carpenter to direct, before realizing they couldn't afford him. As such, the film only loosely abides by the slasher rules, which makes it all the less predictable. Tourist Trap has this sort of hazy 70s cinematography to it that cements it in its era and sets it apart from the 80s boom that would follow. Add in a whole mess of creepy mannequins and you have yourself a movie that's equally kitschy and unnerving. The 80-yard voice of the killer is so odd and jarring and very obvious that it adds a layer of strangeness, and composer Pino Donaggio's elegant and classical score really brings a level of quality to the entire production. As the film becomes crazier in its blurring of reality, every character psychologically unravels for a strange and dark climax. Number 2, The Burning from 1981. Written by Bob Weinstein and Peter Lawrence, and directed by Tony Maylam. A camp caretaker named Cropsey is horribly disfigured in a prank gone wrong. Years later, he's released from the hospital and unleashes his rage on another summer camp, with both counselors and students picked off one by one. Okay, I should probably stop with the whole picking them off one by one thing. That's sort of the central premise of the slasher. As straightforward of a slasher that you could possibly want. The Burning has it all. A summer camp, messy relationships, a scarred maniac with a traumatic past, and some iconic kills. And with a story based on the New York urban legend of Cropsey, it's pulling from the same larger boogeyman mythos as Michael Myers. The summer camp slasher is a cliche, but you'd be surprised at how few movies actually embrace the camp premise. The Burning is deeply entrenched in summer camp life, maybe almost too much, as its first half details teen drama and summer flings more than the horror you're here for. But I dig it. By playing with urban legends and literal campfire stories, The Burning uses its slasher events as both the fulfillment of and basis for scary stories that this ultimately embodies. What you absolutely need to see is the film's iconic raft attack, as Cropsey surprises a group on the water with his trademark garden shears, in an expertly edited sequence that relies more on the shock of the situation than Tom Savini's gore. For that alone, The Burning is a must-watch for slasher fans. And yes, the Weinsteins suck. Number 3. The Prowler from 1981. Written by Neil Barbara and Glenn Leopold and directed by Joseph Zito. Released just as slasher mania was starting to run wild, brother, The Prowler's plot is very similar to its contemporary My Bloody Valentine, with a past killing during a celebration causing a small town to stop its annual graduation ball. Once the ball starts again in modern day, the killer returns. The plot that follows is very standard stuff. almost forgettable. But Zito, who would go on to direct Friday the 13th: The Final Chapter, gives it a dreamy quality, with soft focus and a quiet removal at times that brings a misty ghost town feel, alongside its premise of old ghosts returning to a shell-shocked town. There's also a really cool opening with black and white newsreel footage that connects the story to World War II. But the major selling point is the makeup effects by legend Tom Savini, who creates kills that feel extremely visceral and real to the point of being less exciting and more shocking. I probably can't show most of them, but just take my word that a certain knife through the top of a head is one of the most intense slasher kills of all time. Those moments made both the Prowler and Savini controversial, with the film edited and banned in various countries. Today, it's a must for fans looking for a movie a little more cruel than something like Friday the 13th. Number 4. Just Before Dawn, also from 1981. Written by Jeff Lieberman, Mark Arowitz, and Jonas Middleton, and directed by Jeff Lieberman. My pick for the true hidden gem of this list. Just Before Dawn has a very simple, been there, done that premise. A group of friends journey out into the wilderness, only to be targeted by a backwoods killer. But its strength is in its execution, as its low budget is offset by its authentic wilderness shooting location, adding a realism of atmosphere that makes you feel the desperation and isolation of being in the middle of nowhere without it becoming exaggerated beyond belief. A rickety rope bridge or a fall into a river is dangerous enough, with the film's slasher using these vulnerabilities to keep victims at a disadvantage. This really takes its time, with its first half establishing its deep wood setting and the dangers inherent in a very normal but unforgiving natural world. And while its central killer isn't amazing, the atmosphere, patient pacing, and especially the sound design make this so chilling at times. Specifically, that haunting whistle that opens and closes the film over a blood-red sunrise, and moments of disquieting, distant singing are really great. I also love the atmosphere, which adds tension despite a general lack of music beyond some stings here and there. As far as the actors, George Kennedy as a good-hearted park ranger, and our final girl, who makes the most shocking and inventive choice I've ever seen in a final fight, really make this special. If you like the classic approach to slashers, this is as good as it gets. Number 5. Hell Night, still from 1981. Written by Randy Feldman and directed by Tom DeSimone. A college-set slasher that's just as much a haunted house movie. For something made during the height of the slasher boom, Hell Night is pretty restrained, opting for a spooky atmosphere over graphic kills. Hell Night was produced by Irwin Yablans of Halloween, looking to cash in on the trend he helped start with John Carpenter, and starring Linda Blair almost a decade on from The Exorcist. Looking to give the film a gothic atmosphere despite its modern setting, DeSimone and Feldman place the story in a frat costume party that's broken into a creepy old mansion. Our small group of pledges must stay the night in a mansion rigged by the frat leader to scare them, but harmless scares soon run into the actual killer hiding inside. Overall, Hell Night abides by the general slasher conventions of the time. Mysterious killer targets young victims who indulge in drugs and sex, picks them off one by one. But the cast, and therefore the body count, is way lower. Instead, the movie focuses on atmosphere, tension, and mystery over blood and guts. With its low-budget scares but nicely rendered atmosphere, classic approach to slasher scares that are actually very tame, blend of fake scares versus real threats, and fun pacing, I think Hell Night is very charming. It's a nice amount of spooky and campy, even if it's a little too slow at times. Number 6. Curtains from 1983. Written by Robert Gutza Jr. and directed by Richard Siepka, kinda, and Peter R. Simpson, kinda. A sleazy movie producer invites a group of young actresses to his home to compete for the role of a lifetime, only for the weekend to be interrupted by the older actress who was originally set for the role. Oh, and that actress was previously committed to an asylum to research the role, only to be left there by the producer and slowly go mad. The production of Curtains was a shit show, with the film being shot in 2 chunks separated by years, due to the director Siepka and producer Simpson fighting, with Siepka eventually taking his name off the film when Simpson shot the second half. Still, despite the mess, Curtains is a fascinating and unique take on the slasher, mixing serious adult drama that interrogates mental health and the sleazy behind-the-scenes world of film production, while still indulging in slasher thrills. Presented in an Agatha Christie-esque package, it's a body count slasher mystery through and through, but its blend of adult drama and cheap thrills is always shifting throughout because of its behind-the-scene changes. The film's ice skating set piece is wild and original. The hag mask killer is instantly recognizable. The ending has a great twist that twists further than you'd expect, and the entire thing is just careful enough to balance its red herrings and reveals to keep you guessing. Number 7. Stage Fright from 1987. Written by Lou Cooper and Sheila Goldberg and directed by Michelle Soavi. A troupe of actors rehearsing a musical about a mass murderer find life imitating art when an escaped killer sneaks into their locked theater. With an Italian take on extravagant slasher thrills, Stage Fright really knows how to have fun with its concept. Starting with what we think is a killing but quickly revealed to be a play, transitioning into a musical number complete with sax solo. What I really like about Stage Fright is the variety of tones that it manages to hit across its 90-minute runtime. As an aside, one of the things I love about classic slashers is how they usually don't go past an hour and a half. They do what they're supposed to do and get out quick. Stage Fright moves from being a very arch, campy, almost parody in its first act, to a frenetic kill spree in its second, and quickly whittles down its cast to a more serious but operatic finale of Final Girl against Killer. All set in a theater, it's your classic case of a movie having just enough budget for its focused story and making the most of it. The film doesn't have much more in mind beyond delivering the typical kills and thrills, but its premise of a serial killer musical stalked by a real serial killer is great fun, with costumes, blaring music, and all the unique elements of a set being used for your typical horror set pieces. The really dumb cops who can't be bothered to help, and the movie's inability to fully embrace musical aesthetics keep it from being one of the all-time greats, but it's still a good time. Number 8. Slumber Party Massacre 2 from 1987. Written and directed by Deborah Brock. If you're watching this, you probably already know the original Slumber Party Massacre, so let's go with the sequel. Like the rest of the series, what sets Slumber Party Massacre apart in the subgenre is the major presence of women behind the camera. Here, there's a much greater focus placed on the subconscious of our lead girl Courtney, who survived the original, with some seriously strange nightmares in the first act, underlining the link between sex and death. Our lead heroine, back from a mental institution, has continuous nightmares and hallucinations of a rock and roll murderer with a guitar drill, directly linked to her burgeoning sexuality. A weekend getaway with friends puts even more pressure on her mental state. And while the movie plays with the idea of whether this driller killer is real or not, it holds off on the reveal and slasher mayhem way longer than you'd expect. The movie is only an hour and 15 minutes with credits, and it isn't until 50 minutes in where things explode, basically cramming all its slasher thrills into a condensed final act. The movie also makes time for weirdo shit, like an extended musical sequence as the killer closes in on a victim. I don't love the ending, but I'm really fascinated by its female perspective and heavy emphasis on feminine sexual anxieties, translated through the metaphor of a phallic killer. Number 9. Edge of the Axe from 1988. Written by Joaquin Amichatis, Javier Elorrieta, Jose Frade, and Pablo Aldebaran, and directed by Jose Ramon Larraz. A Spanish slasher production largely filmed in Big Bear, California, Edge of the Axe is half murder mystery, half slasher, and all computing-propelled romance. Immediately starting the body count with a cool car wash attack, and spiraling into an investigation in a sleepy mountain town. Edge of the Axe also has a strange preoccupation with computers, with lots of green and black computer screens and the, unique choice to have its on-screen messages read by a monotone voiceover narrator. Best of all is the collision between Spanish production and setting in Big Bear, which apparently hasn't changed in 30 years, as it still looks like it did when I went there last year because I immediately recognized it without looking it up. Lots of nice mountain town sleepy time honk shoe feelings, and a very cool look for the killer. The white plaster mask and ski jacket is simple but eye-catching. Edge of the Axe has just enough strangeness and variety of tones and storylines, thanks to its Spanish perspective to set it apart post-second wave slasher boom. There's also a fun final twist that helps push it into more of a psychological thriller, even if it kinda breaks the rest of the movie. But altogether, that's what solidifies the film as a must-watch for big-time slasher fans, outside of its solid structure, good kills, and fun setting. Good, cozy slasher vibes. Number 10. Intruder from 1989. Written by Scott Spiegel and Lawrence Bender and directed by Scott Spiegel. On the final night before it's set to close forever, the night shift crew of a grocery store is targeted by a maniac that uses the store's tools in the most unconventional ways. But with relationships strained and people not who they seem, who could the killer be? The feature directing debut of Scott Spiegel, most well known for his work with Sam Raimi and Bruce Campbell on the Evil Dead films, Intruder has a lot of shared DNA with Evil Dead 2, the greatest movie of all time, just edging out Predator, Kiki's Delivery Service, and Chungking Express, including both Sam and Ted Raimi in small parts and Bruce Campbell in a brief cameo. The strength of Intruder is how grounded it is in its everyday setting, with the crew renting out an empty grocery store for the shoot, which slams into increasingly insane horror. It's a movie that feels lived in thanks to its real-world location and inspiration from Spiegel's days working in a Michigan grocery store. Whether you've worked in a market or just done a lot of shopping, Intruder's setting will feel like it's right in your hometown. And while the true identity of its killer doesn't take rocket science to figure out, and its final moments are just a little too twisty to be satisfying, everything else checks off the boxes for insane kills, some pretty nasty blood and guts, and a sustained suspense that I want from my slashers. It's also a treat to see Sam Raimi on camera instead of behind it, although I can't help but wonder what this would have been like if Raimi had directed. Number 11, Triangle from 2009. Written and directed by Christopher Smith. The entry most tangentially related to the slasher subgenre on this list, Triangle is just as much a psychological thriller and a supernatural drama as it is a story with a killer on the loose. But that's what makes it so great. After a storm hits their yacht, a group of lost-at-sea friends board an abandoned cruise ship, with our star, Jess, played by Melissa George, convinced that something is very wrong. Because Triangle unfolds in slow reveals, I won't say much more beyond this being a story of time twisting in on itself, blurring the line between the causes and effects of our characters' actions. There's just enough of the slasher thrill here to add a sense of psychological danger to everything that happens. But it's the psychological trauma and themes of guilt that are more important. In the end, the film's final reveals add so much emotional gravitas and meaning to everything we've seen come before. George, in particular, sells the many evolutions of her character so well. Not every slasher needs a twist or some wild reveal at the end, but the subgenre's roots in giallo mean that mystery and a late reveal are part of its DNA. The classic sort of first-person killer mystery of Friday the 13th is the closest to giallo, but it's taken on many forms since. The twists and reveals of Triangle are awesome because they are based in the emotional core of the movie. Number 12, The Final Girls from 2015. Written by MA14 and Joshua John Miller, and directed by Todd Strauss Schulson. While watching the slasher movie that starred her departed mom, Max and her friends are sucked into the story of Camp Bloodbath. Now, Max has the chance to reconnect with her mother and change the rules of a well-loved genre. While its summer camp setting and masked killer are the most indebted to Friday the 13th, The Final Girls is really about reconciling with a dead parent. As its co-writer, Joshua John Miller drew from his own experience with his father, Jason Miller, who starred in The Exorcist, saying, "There's something a little bit unnatural to see your parent constantly die in a film, but it's something that also becomes iconic. What would it be like if you had a second chance? But your second chance was inside of a movie." With its meta-narrative, The Final Girls balances both sides of the horror comedy equation and is really stylishly shot, with its characters trapped in and trying to bend the movie around them. Best of all, it has a big emotional undercurrent thanks to its relationship between Max and her mom, played out through the constraints of the slasher it fully embraces. That's the heart of the movie, using the slasher as a delivery system for reconciliation through art that's impossible in real life. I love that the slasher, with all its well-worn traditions, is almost like a comfort blanket for the heartache of both creator and character. And number 13, Haunt from 2019, written and directed by Scott Beck and Brian Woods. Placing a horror movie within a fake horror setting can be a great way to catch audiences off guard. See Hell House LLC. And I really like the way Beck and Woods keep you in tension for a lot longer than you might expect, setting up its premise of a group of friends going to an extreme haunted house attraction in the middle of nowhere, with really no one around, letting you know that something is absolutely going to go wrong, but forcing you to question when the safe haunts will end and when the real horror will begin. Scare mazes all depend on the suspension of disbelief, with both audiences and scare actors working with one another to indulge in fear. And there are few things more disarming than a scare actor suddenly breaking character and acting like a normal person. Haunt uses that to play with both its characters and audience. And thankfully, its survivors and victims act like real people. Not in a "I've seen horror movies before" way, but in a "I'm a real person in a bad situation" kind of way. And the reveal of what's behind those masks? Pretty great. Everyone talks about the kills in a slasher movie as why fans love it, but just as important is the catharsis and satisfaction of a survivor fighting back. When a slasher really earns its big climax and finally turns the table on a killer, the entire film and its horrors bring final girl and audience together to conquer fear. The finale of Haunt executes this so well, with a perfect bow on a film that only gets stronger as it goes along. And with that, we reach the end of this journey through the unsung side of slashers. And I hope this inspired you to dive deeper into the world of this killer horror subgenre and discover all of its often underappreciated glory. Thanks for watching today's video, and a rather unconventional video for the channel. List videos aren't a typical thing here for my channel unless it's part of a ranking during a retrospective, but this is something that I've wanted to do for a while and have been slowly researching over the last year or so. I am a big fan of the slasher, as you probably know if you're a fan of the channel, and I've covered a lot of the classic slashers over the years, as well as a lot of the more offbeat ones as well. But over time there have been a lot of different slashers that I've come to love, but aren't talked about a lot in the general consciousness, even by horror fans. And while I didn't want to do a video on each of the individual films featured here, I thought it would be really fun to give them a quick highlight, and hopefully push a few more people to watching them. Because I'm sure that if you're a subscriber of the channel, a lot of these movies would appeal to you as well. And doing a quick rundown like this is actually just really fun. Of the 13 here, I think that Just Before Dawn and Triangle are the biggest hidden gems, and I would highly recommend them to anyone that likes any sort of slasher. Of course, there are plenty that I haven't mentioned here, with some smaller gems that were a little too well known like Psycho 2 and Sleepaway Camp, but those deserve their own dedicated videos. And there wasn't enough space for other honorable mentions like Amsterdamned, Sick, Neon Maniacs, Final Exam, Blood Rage, The Strangers, Pray at Night, and Cherry Falls. In any case, I hope this inspired you to check out some more slashers. And if this does well and people really like it, I may do another 13 slashers for people to watch, or I might make 13 unsung horror movies a recurring segment for the channel, where I cover other subgenres like monster, sci-fi, body horror, ghosts, and supernatural. So if you're a fan of this video, let me know. And if you really like one of these movies in particular, or if you end up watching some of these movies because of this video, please let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons for their continued support. If you'd like to be a patron, it's only $1 a month for early access to every video and exclusive Patreon-only reviews. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves and taking a chance on a slasher that's brand new to you.